China has just held its 14th National People's Congress, setting out plans for its economy. Here to take us through what we learned is Elizabeth Economy, Hoover Institution's Senior Fellow. So welcome back. Great to have you.
Thanks so much, David.
What did we learn?
I think the big takeaway from this NPC was basically that economic reform and opening is off the table for the foreseeable future. The message coming out of the NPC was basically all about state-directed, party state-directed investment. You know, investment in the military, investment in R&D, investment in advanced manufacturing. You know, we even had a reference to a new leap forward, which is a kind of unfortunate reference back to the Great Leap Forward, which killed tens of millions of Chinese people. But I think, again, there was very little about the private sector, very little, sort of about welcoming back foreign investment, and very little about the consumer. So it's about control over the economy. And I'd say control over the information space.
What does that mean for growth? Because President Xi must be a little concerned about growth. He's got demographic issues, he's got real estate issues, he's got debt issues. He must be concerned about growth. Is that state control his theory about how he's going to get the thing growing again?
Absolutely. I think it's about investing in technology, right, and advanced manufacturing. And so when Xi Jinping talks about, marshaling the, new productive forces, right, he's very explicit. It's about space commerce. It's about EVs. It's about AI. There's a whole AI plus initiative, right? They're going to integrate AI through all the sectors of the economy. It's moving away from the traditional investment in the property sector, which, as everybody knows, has, been quite weak and sort of, oversubscribed, into advanced manufacturing, into innovation. So that's how he's going to grow the economy. It's relying on those coastal provinces where you do have the innovation, you do have an incredible manufacturing ecosystem, and leaving the rest of the country really to suffer through.
One challenge President Xi faces is demographic, as the Chinese population ages and the birth rate remains low, which Ishwar Prasad of Cornell sees as driving the move to invest in technology in order to increase productivity.
They are looking to investment in the defense sector, partly for national security reasons, but partly also as a technology play. They are very keen to aggressively increase investment in the new technology sectors, especially green energy, electric vehicles, and a variety of other technologies that are seen as technologies of the future. So that's where the real emphasis is going to lie, because ultimately, I think the Chinese government recognizes that if it wants the economy to grow in a sustainable way, it's going to have to generate much better productivity growth, because investment growth by itself is not going to do it, especially in the property sector and other sectors which traditionally used to drive growth. And with weakening demographics, productivity is really the one thing that can boost or at least hold up growth.
I was in China back in August and had the opportunity to meet with a number of senior economic officials. I went with Secretary Raimondo, and we heard consistently all the way down from the premier down to the Minister of Commerce, they welcome foreign investment. They want U.S. business to be there, and they're all holding meetings with international business, telling them that we welcome you. But there are no steps, there are no concrete steps being taken to demonstrate that welcome. And so what you have is the security apparatus in China taking all sorts of measures that in fact are signaling the opposite. And so I think there's really a battle between the economic reformers, the few that still remain, and the security apparatus. And it's really the security apparatus that Xi Jinping has empowered. And so I think in that battle, it's clear that the security side of things is winning.
Whatever the shape of the Chinese economy, it is the second largest in the world. And it's very different, it strikes me, than when we were dealing with the Soviet Union back in the 60s and 70s. We could sort of avoid that economically. China, the West cannot avoid China, dealing with China. So what is the U.S. and Western policy economically toward China right now?
I think, there are many debates within the United States alone, but also among our European and Asian allies about how do we strike the right balance. And I think, the code word, of course, is de-risking, right? And what does that mean and how do we look at that? And I think there are a number of ways in which, we in the United States are de-risking. I think first, there's the issue of de-risking around national security. And that's the most important thing, right? We want to make sure that whatever it is that we're selling to China or any investing that we're doing there or any investments that they're making here, we are not doing anything that is helping them technologically with products that are going to potentially undermine our own national security. Right? So I think that's number one. Then there's de-risking around our supply chains. And I think that's, basically that happened because of COVID, right? COVID was our wake-up call. When we couldn't get, personal protective equipment, the PPE that we needed, right? It was all located in China, all the manufacturing of the gloves and the masks and everything else, right? We realized that we can't afford to have that kind of dependence on any one source. And so, now the big issue, of course, is semiconductors. And that actually isn't even about China. That's about Taiwan, right? Our reliance on Taiwan for advanced semiconductors. So it's about talking with our businesses, about businesses themselves, understanding, right, the risks of an overdependence on China or any other one, sort of one source for critical supply.
President Biden, what's your message to China today?
Geopolitics figures prominently in Chinese economic plans as its traditional reliance on exports comes into question, which will force it to look inward for the growth it needs.
I think what they articulated some years ago is the dual circulation policy, remaining engaged with the rest of the world, but becoming internally self-reliant in terms of technology, in terms of innovation, in terms of markets. That, I think, has probably become an even greater force that is driving the structure of economic policies right now, because it's not just the US, but the West more broadly, including Europe and Japan, which are very important export markets for China, that are very concerned right now that what has happened in the last 2 or 3 years, the huge expansion in supply and essentially manufacturing capacity in China, but with demand remaining weak, means that China is going to have to export a lot of its output. And this is something that really unsettles countries around the world that are China's big export markets. So if you take EVs, for instance, that is an area where there is a very significant concern that the US and other countries have about China beginning to dominate those markets with its still relatively low cost and low wage structure. So barriers are going to come up, and I think China recognizes that it's going to have to rely a lot more on domestic rather than external demand.
And just as China needs to look more towards its own economy for growth, the United States is investing heavily in some of the areas that until now China has taken the lead on.
I think that is a big part, frankly, of the Biden administration strategy. All of the investment through the CHIPS and Science Act, through the Inflation Reduction Act, through the bipartisan infrastructure law, all of those things are about taking some part of government capital to incentivize private capital to come in, to rethinking sort of the rules and regulations around these sectors to incentivize more investment, because yes, we don't want to be left behind. We don't want to end up with areas that, for whatever reason, our companies decided not to invest in. One of the things I think that we really need to focus on is our persistence. I think back to 1979, President Carter was putting solar panels on the West Wing in 1979. Ronald Reagan, and he did a lot of great things, gutted, the renewable energy effort within the government. And today, China, of course, which was nowhere, let's face it, in the late 1970s when it comes to renewable energy or to solar panels, is now the leading manufacturer and exporter of solar panels. And I think in sector after sector, you see that China is willing to invest for decades until it emerges as the global leader. And we need to have some of that as well.